Hey, what's going on? It's Coach Mark with Journeyman Fitness, and I am making a quick video on my four pillars of success that I lead all of my clients through. And this is going to help them not only transform their bodies, change their mind, and kind of build in systems into their life so that when they lose this weight, it's permanent weight loss. And I want to walk you through it so that you become familiar and maybe want to have these processes implemented into your life. Now, most of the guys that I work with are in their 40s, which is why I have this lean after 40. And they're very, very successful with their job. They're very data driven. They manage people. They've got obligations to their family. They're just super busy, right? They've got a lot of pressure on their shoulders. And unfortunately, their health and fitness falls by the wayside, right? There's only so many hours of the day. But what I want to tell you is that, obviously at 40, your energy and your focus and being able to kind of communicate success are one of those things that become very, very important. And you notice it when you don't have it. And so if we start to make some changes to these things, to your activity and your diet and all this stuff, you can see some crazy progress, even though you're busy and you have a lot of obligations. So let's walk through how we do it. Now, what I really want to focus on are the systems that we implement when you become a client. Now, obviously, if you don't know some information about, for instance, eating protein on your diet or certain exercises, if you don't have the know-how, I will help you with that. The know-how is kind of like the easiest stuff. And obviously there's a ton of know-how on the internet you can find for free. But implementing all this knowledge into a system that helps you basically transform your body systematically is, for a lot of people, it would take them years to do it on their own. And so really, this is kind of what I'm going to show you is how we implement systems. And if as far as the mindset goes, this is very, very particular to each person. But, we can go over things like, if you don't believe you can get into great shape, that's kind of one of those things that we need to knock down. Or if you don't believe you could do these things because you're so busy, we can also kind of get rid of these sabotaging behaviors, and which obviously we go through in the program. So let's focus on the systems. Now, the four pillars that I go through, or my four-step system, is kind of encompasses all the major parts of taking you from where you're at into kind of the best version of you in the future. The initial program that I have is 12 weeks long, but obviously after those 12 weeks, we can continue to see progress. And if you have more than 5 pounds of weight loss to lose, doing work past 12 weeks is kind of required. So anyways, the four pillar system is, first off, we do an assessment. I call it my airplane assessment. Then once we get this assessment going, we kick off into my inverse diet and training program. And this is kind of my take on how to approach it. And I'll go into this with some specific examples. We need a feedback system to make sure that we're adjusting to your body and making sure that everything is adjusting to how your body is responding. And then lastly, we do some Futurecasting to make sure that all of your progress is permanent. So let's kick into it. First thing we do is we take an assessment. So the big thing I really want to highlight during this pillar is that I'm very anti one thing. Most programs that you read about try to catch your eye or catch your ear, because of this thing that you're missing, this one super secret workout plan, or there's one kind of food, or, kind of there's maybe a demonizing sugar or processed food or whatever. But essentially what happens is, in this kind of one thing approach, is you take this forest, which is your life, which is your schedule, your priorities, your environment, all this stuff. And then it just basically ignores all of that and says this one thing is the reason why you're not in shape. And we miss all the nuance, all the kind of context that you need to make permanent change. And we just kind of reduce it, which is this reductionist approach. We reduce it down to just this one thing. And I see it very often. I'll see most guys will try like 4 or 5 workout programs or diet programs a year, and they're all different things that they think they need. And by the end of the year, they've basically just wasted money and time, and they're no further along than when they started. So if we move away from this one thing approach and we go into a system approach, then what we can do is we can kind of get all this context of what your life is like and kind of build in, start from a good place. So what I like to do is I like to think of your life as an airplane where we have a lot of components that all work together. And you're either soaring or you're crashing. And so if you're crashing, we obviously want to right that ship pretty quickly, and we can look at it in a way where we can see what we need to change first. So in an airplane, you've got 6 major parts. You got the cockpit, wings, you've got the left and right engine, you got the fuel, you got the body. And this idea was presented to me from a company called Business Made Simple out of Tennessee. And they said, your business can be looked at as an airplane where it has a lot of components that all work together. And you can't just ignore a bunch of components and only focus on one. Really what you should do is you should look at all 6, excuse me, and then you can see that, if I change one now and another one later, we can make incremental progress. So, as a business, you can look at it with these 6 components. And then I took that idea and I said, well, we can also look at it or take this analogy with your health. And so what I like to think of is your life and your health and your fitness and all that stuff can be represented in this airplane by the cockpit, which is your vision and how you kind of read data and kind of understand how you're making progress. You've got the wings of the airplane, which is how you diet and eat. And I take a very flexible diet approach with some slight changes, which I'll go into. And then we've got the engines, which propel you towards your goal. And this is your activity in your training, not just training, but activity, like how physically active you are, how much you sit during the day, et cetera, et cetera. We've got the fuel of the plane. If you run out of fuel, obviously you're going to crash. And these are your habits and your routines, the stuff you do day in and day out. And then lastly, the actual body of the airplane, what actually carries the passengers and the employees and all the cargo and stuff like that. This is your environment and your priority, the stuff that's important to you. So if we take all of that stuff and we kind of get a sense of where you're at, then what we can do is we can draw a path of this is where you're at and this is where you're going. And then we can appropriately give you a plan for your training and your diet and, habit changes and all that, and not just kind of overwhelm you in week 1, right? We want this stuff to be sustainable. Once we get that assessment in, we kind of understand where you're at, then we can really start to make some changes. And some of the biggest changes we make are to your diet. Obviously, training's important and activity is important, but for most people, they're like, what kind of foods am I going to have to cut out? And, how much am I going to have to starve myself? And, can I have, birthday cake with my kids on the birthday weekend? And the answer is yes. And this is kind of how, obviously we take a flexible diet approach, but also we start a little bit differently than most diets. And so let me go into it. Now, for most diets, let's get a little annotation here. So for most diets, what we do or what we see is that you begin, this is kind of, let's say how much food you eat on average, day in and day out. And if we're not losing weight, maybe gaining just slightly over the year, let's say you're gaining 5 pounds a year, you can say that you're eating slightly over maintenance. And that's what this green line is. So you're kind of just ever so slightly gaining weight over the year. Well, in a diet, what we see is most diets, what they'll do is they'll say, okay, cut out a bunch of these foods and let's get you to start losing weight, which is totally fine. This is actually what works, right? But eventually what's going to happen is you're going to plateau, which is also, there's nothing wrong with you. This is very normal. You eat less food, you get less energy, you start moving less and all that. So they're like, okay, well, let's cut your calories even more. And then let's up the exercise because you got to lose weight. And again, there's nothing wrong with this. You're losing weight every time you kind of plateau. Basically we're going to increment calorie cut, and we're going to do some more exercise. Again, nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the 12 weeks, what's going to happen is you're going to finish that diet. You're going to lose X amount of weight. But think about your motivation. It is going to be the lowest, right? It is your fatigue, your diet fatigue is going to be the highest. The kind of the amount of food that you're eating is also going to be the lowest. So once that diet ends, what is actually kind of keeping you at that level? And the answer is nothing. You're so desperate for food. What we see is just a rebound effect. And, a lot of the times you're actually going to rebound back to even more than where you started. So what you've got is you've lost all this weight. You really ramped up the exercise, you dropped those calories, you're kind of starving yourself at the end of the 12 weeks, your fatigue is super high, your motivation is super low. And so now, and then, what happens afterwards? Well, you just go back to old habits. And so now you're like, not only have I gotten back to where I'm at, but I'm not motivated to do another diet because I know what's going to happen at the end of it. I'm going to waste 12 weeks of my life and I'm just going to end up, kind of in a worse spot. What I like to approach it is I'm going to say, hey, listen, we can make some big changes. Okay, let's say you start in the same spot. Okay, at the beginning, however, your motivation is the highest. Your stress level is, in terms of diet, is the lowest. You are the most sensitive to change. And so what we can do is if we know, okay, listen, this is after our assessment, this is kind of how we eat. What we can do is, and these are not to scale, but we can actually make a huge drop at the beginning when you're the most motivated to do what needs to be done. And so now we're under this line of maintenance. You start losing weight. You start seeing these quick wins. And what we can do is we can kind of hold you at that level for a little bit of time, a week or two, maybe 3 weeks if you're feeling really aggressive. And then now that you are improving in how you track your food and you're starting to lose weight, what we can do is we can bump your food up just a little bit. And so now we can hold you at that new level. We can watch and see how your body responds. Your motivation is still nice and high. And now you have a nice little bump in calories. So, as far as energy goes, you're kind of bumping it up. And then we go another little bit of time, a week or two, we bump those calories back up. And then we can systematically start building those calories back up over the 12 weeks. And kind of depending on your timing and how you want to go at it, if you look at it, we've got the inverse of what happens with a lot of diets. And so at the end of this 12 weeks, depending on how your body responds, you will be close to, if not more, than where, in terms of food eaten, than you were at the beginning. And you are way more motivated to keep going because you've dropped a lot of this fatigue because you're eating more and more food. And, let's say maybe you even wanted to take a break. Well, you can hold on to this level because now you're, essentially eating the same amount of food that you were at the beginning, but now you're 25 pounds down. This is my inverse diet method. This is a process that I can go through. This is a process that you can go through. We can implement this, in stages so that, you can kind of manage times and vacations and holidays and that stuff. We can just do a lot of stuff with it. And even if you're done, you've got super lean and you're like, now I want to put on some muscle. What we can do is we can start to implement some muscle building strategies afterwards. We just have a lot of options. And so I find the most amount of success with it. It's really, really wonderful for long-term progress. And obviously, like I said, we just have so many more options at the end of those 12 weeks. It just keeps the progress going. All right. All right. So let me clear all drawings. Okay. So now we get to pillar 3. So like I said, we kind of make some changes to your training. We make some changes to your diet. Well, your body is going to respond to those changes. And we don't want to take a dogmatic approach. We don't want to just say, hey, man, trust the process, right? Eat paleo, eat vegetarian, just trust the process that's going to work for you. We can get data that tells us, hey, listen, is this, is this little change that we made, is this actually getting you the results that you want? And so what we do is we implement a very particular kind of feedback system, which I call cards. This is proprietary to me, essentially. But in effect, what we do is we take all the data that we get, right? So we make some changes. Listen, I want you to eat this amount of food. I want you to train this way. I want you to get so many steps. We take all that data of how your body is responding to it, and we say, okay, for next week, here's a little tweak we're going to do. Here's a little, change we're going to make. And then what we can do is we can start to create a custom program for you, and not just based on belief, but based upon a couple of things. Number one, we can kind of read the data and say, okay, these circumstances tells us which actions that we need to take, and that's going to give us the results that we want. We can change this stuff on a weekly basis, and this is going to take into account things like work got really crazy this week, my kid got sick and I had to stay home, or I got sick, or I haven't been sleeping that well. We can be really dynamic with how we make changes to our plan. And we can also understand that these aren't emotional changes. If the scale weight changes 3 to 5 pounds in a day, we're not making emotional decisions, because what we can do is we can say, well, on average, you're still down a couple of pounds. So we understand that everything is still going pretty well. So we take those kind of three major things and we create a structure around how do we change from week to week, so that over the 12 weeks, we're really customizing it for you and making sure that your body will respond the best to this plan. The last thing that we do is, and this is kind of for long-term stuff. So let's say that you lose 30 pounds at the end of the 12 weeks, right? One of the big fears is I lose all this weight. And then what happens if I regain it? And then I'm just stuck losing the same 30 pounds week after week. The reality is um, you're going to tell yourself a story every single day. You're going to have a ton of thoughts every day, and you're going to tell yourself and repeat it day in and day out. And the story could be, um, I'm just too busy. I can't eat healthy. Or, I'm just, I've always been a big guy and I just can't lose weight, or I can't keep it off, or whatever. The reality is, back in the day, if you played school sports, um, I'm sure that very rarely did you miss a practice. And why didn't you miss a practice? Because you weren't the kind of guy who missed the practice, right? This is just who you are. So you showed up even when it was inconvenient or you didn't want to. You showed up to class for school because you wanted to get this degree or whatever. Like, there was basically just a code of conduct that you never really questioned. And that turned you in the kind of person that you were, the kind of athlete you were, the kind of student you were, and all that. Now, currently, the story that you're telling yourself is getting you to where you're at. If you are going to turn into the best version of yourself, we need to understand, how does that guy, that best version, think and act and talk to himself? And so if we can kind of see the bridge between where you're at and then what you need to think and believe, we can start to really change the story that you tell yourself, so that you're just the guy who eats this way. You're just the guy who trains this way. You're just the guy who dot, dot, dot. Right. And so when you lose the 30 pounds, you just do these things without question, because that's the kind of guy you are. And so that's how we can lose 30 pounds or 50 pounds or 100 pounds or whatever it is. And then you can keep that weight off and never doubt yourself, because you're really evolving into the best version of yourself. And so there's a lot of tools and there's a lot of practices that I have to kind of work on this. It's not just kind of like a sheet that I give you. But this is how we can take you from where you're at today and then make all the changes that you implement permanent. And so these are my 4 pillars, how we kind of take somebody from where they're at into the best version of themselves. And so if this is something that is, if this is something that you're interested in and you obviously are missing in your life, and you're saying like, I want better energy, I want to look better in my clothes, I want to have more confidence, and I don't want to be stuck, doing these stupid dogmatic diets where I just starve myself and all that stuff. What I would love for you to do is fill out the form and say, hey, Mark, I want to see how this would work for me. Find a time to chat. We could do a little Zoom call just like this, and really kind of map out how we can start making changes for you. So hopefully this video was super helpful, and love for you to schedule an appointment and set up a call with me and start working on you starting right now. All right.